Hello and a very good morning. Welcome to Contemporary Matters interview, and we are talking about the conservation part this time. And we at our studio have invited today Dr. Rodney Jackson, who is a leading expert on snow leopard and is a director of Snow Leopard Conservancy. And I would like to welcome him. Dear sir, welcome to our studio.
Thank you very much, Sitka.
From your expertise, I would like to ask a general question in the beginning. What is actually a snow leopard?
Nepal is so lucky to have this rare cat. So it's a big cat, smaller than a leopard, but it lives up in the high mountains, and it's adapted to basically living above, let's say, 3,000 meters, up to as high as 5,000 meters. And it is called the snow leopard, but it has a little bit of trouble with snow. And the trouble it has really, although it has very large forepaws and a long tail that enables it to balance, and it can walk on snow, walking on snow, as you can imagine, in very steep areas can be quite dangerous because it's slippery. So if it has a choice, it will walk on dry rock or scree. So maybe a better name is the rock leopard, but I think I'll stay with snow leopard.
All right. So what do you think, why this creature should be preserved or conserved?
So snow leopards evolved many thousands of years ago. Actually, their closest relative is the tiger, and they evolved in Central Asia. They live in the high mountains, so they live in 12 countries all the way from Russia, Siberia, down to the Himalayas, across the Himalayas to Afghanistan, and then up through the independent Central Asian republics. They're a very rare animal. They're very sparsely distributed, so they need a lot of habitat. Protecting them becomes a challenge. They are the environmental barometer of high mountains. Where you see snow leopards, you can be pretty sure that the ecosystem is in good shape. Where you don't see them, you know there's some problems.
All right. As I Googled it about the issue yesterday, then I happened to see some of your classes that you, some of the classes that you spoke about it in a public forums. And then I found you've stressed on one thing especially, that is the coexistence between the society and the wildcat.
Yes, I really believe in that, but it took me probably 15 years to realize that the most cost-effective, the easiest solution is if we can change people's perception of snow leopards. So in many of these countries, it's the herders that are living, you know, at the margin economically. Their annual income might be $400, $500, but not a lot. And the snow leopard is looking for wild prey, the blue sheep and the ibex that occur across the area. Where humans have poached out the prey base, the snow leopard has no choice but to kill the livestock. And so people would come back in the morning from their and see their livestock pen, see a snow leopard has got in and killed 30, 20, or even 100 of their sheep and goats. So it's like losing your bank account overnight. Naturally, people would call the snow leopard a pest and want to eliminate it. And if you interview herders across these countries and you ask them the solution for snow conservation, kill the snow leopard.
Okay.
But we don't want to do that because the snow leopard really is an asset. It's needed to maintain the natural ecology, but I believe it can actually be turned around to become a very valuable asset, alive rather than dead. And in, let's see, about 2000, we started to work with local communities in Ladakh, India. They are Buddhists, so they really don't want to kill, but if they have to, they will. And we said, okay, what can we do to protect your livestock and at the same time to increase your household income so that, you know, you get a benefit from the presence of the snow leopard? And they said, well, we can make our livestock pens predator-proof so the cat cannot get in. That would be good, but even more important, we want income so we can send our children to better schools so they have a better future. And we asked them, well, how do we do that? And they said, well, we see these tourists come, they come through, we get no money from them because the trekking agencies camp and they capture everything. And some of the women thought about it and said, well, I got a good idea. If we did a homestay, like a bed and breakfast. We have big houses, Tibetan houses. We can put a room aside for $10, $12. Somebody could come and stay the night. We'd give them simple meals, and they would learn a bit about our culture. And that has completely changed the situation in northern India. To now, snow leopards are very well protected. You know, I spent 20 years, every year I'd be out 4, 5 or more months, and I'd only see a snow leopard once or twice a year if I were lucky. Now I can go to Ladakh, these places, I can go to a homestay, and in 2 weeks I can see snow leopards 7 times, at least 3 times. And this is dramatic. Now they see the snow leopard, you know, in a completely different view. If we can do the same thing in different parts of Nepal, I think that would be great. If we just help create community managed compensation funds so that when there's a hardship case, they get a relief, you know, some kind of financial relief.
So you think that the preserving the wildcat, the snow leopards, from the community level also increases the reliability of the community, and also it helps in boosting the tourism, right?
And I think it goes even further. If the next step, the next challenge that we face in is citizen science. How can we get the communities involved in the monitoring? Because after all, governments are, you know, often situated far away. It's expensive to send somebody out there.
But for this, the citizens would have to get equipped with all the knowledges and all the tools and techniques.
Yeah, but they have a lot of knowledge. We have to build on their knowledge. They, you know, though they don't often see snow leopards, they know what it is. Yeah. If we can give them just simple tools to report sightings, then we can get so much further ahead, because there are very few sightings in the literature of snow leopard. And now that we have smartphones coming out and we have networks, we can put an app on their phone. Those that are able to, and the app can be in Nepali, doesn't have to be in English or anything, and they can actually record the observation. The next time they're in contact with the network, it goes up to the web and it's available to scientists.
Yeah, but for all these, it should, the idea must be for the people to realize that snow leopards are not to kill, but to conserve. The idea should be like to inject in them, right?
Good point, yes. And I think education of you know, school children and of adults is very important. And one thing that we have been doing, we would like to expand it. It's contingent upon funding, of course, but something we call Snow Leopard Scouts, and that's taking the youth and exposing them to, you know, their natural heritage, the wildlife, and from them understanding the importance of protection, understanding how to you know, address this conflict, because we've got to eliminate the conflict, otherwise we will not succeed.
Yes, and we talked about the connection between the community, the realization of the people to preserve. What about the government sector? How is Nepal doing for the preservation?
Nepal is doing actually very well. So in the bigger picture, the 12 countries, back in about 2010 or 11, the World Bank and United Nations Development Program brought together at sort of a ministerial level all 12 governments, and they discussed the importance of protecting snow leopards not only nationally but globally, because in fact snow leopards are what I might call a transboundary species. So the core habitat in almost all countries except maybe China is along the international border. Mountain ranges form borders. Snow leopards like mountain ranges. So it makes a lot of sense to bring the countries together. They did. They created what is called the Global Snow Leopard Environmental Protection Plan that addresses all the threats. From that, they've created national protection plans. Nepal has one. It has actually 2. It has one that fits in the G-slip. The G-slip is based on a secretariat that's in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. And the goal of it is by the year 2020, throughout these 12 nations, there will be 20 landscapes of snow leopards secured. And in each landscape, there will be at least 100 snow leopards. and secured with the support of local people.
All right. So tell us more about the GSLEP and what actually Nepal is going on with it, and also about the action plan.
Okay. Nepal is a very active member, and in fact there was a meeting that the public might know about in January of this year. They brought together all the 12 states, and there was presentations from Prime Minister and high officials here in Kathmandu, and it was quite clear that Nepal, one of the smallest countries, was actually leading in terms of action. So they've got a snow leopard conservation plan that now runs from 17 to 2021, I believe. GSLIP runs up to 2020, so hence the 20 landscapes by 2020. And you know, Nepal's putting in a lot of technical support, a lot of information about snow leopard habitats, home range. It's coming actually from research being done in Kachinjunga area and also planned for ACAP area and Sheifuksundo.
So how does it does the work? Does it mobilize the local NGOs or the INGOs, or how?
Well, there's no funding for their local NGOs or INGOs. A lot of that has to come from the private sector, foundations, and from the multi-government sector, you know, the UNDP and those various agencies and bilateral agencies. And that hasn't been mobilized yet. It's in the process of being mobilized. We're going to have a meeting in Bishkek later this month, and the focus on it is what is called green infrastructure. So one of the big threats to snow leopard range-wide is things like development, you know, roads, railroads, even border fences can restrict movement between countries. And we have to reconcile those. We need development, of course, but what we need is environmentally friendly green development.
Okay, so as we're talking more about this snow leopard, it's becoming more interesting to know about what it's actually like, what is the nature of the snow leopard. Because since you've been watching it closely, and in Nepal you've spent more than 4 decades, around 4 decades.
40 years in short time. I come and go. Lately I'm mostly in Kathmandu and not in snow leopard because of work in networking.
But in the initial days, like in the 1983 and 84, you first radio tapped the 5 leopards.
Right, and I would say...
And back then the technology was not too high-tech.
Technology was not high-tech. Radio collars existed, but you had to track them from the ground. And because the animal has such incredible camouflage, I mean, you can walk 3 or 4 meters away from it and not see it. It was like studying a ghost, is what I would say. We would know where it was because of the radio signals, but we would rarely see it. And we'd come along later and we'd find out where it made a kill of a blue sheep. That was very valuable information. We found out how they interacted with another, where they bred, what time of year, and how big an area especially they needed.
And then you realize there is a need of a landscape preservation.
Yes, you can study 1 or 2 animals, but to save a species, you have to save a population. You have to save at least, scientists think, at least 500, if not 5,000. And that means you need a lot of area. And so the landscape approach actually is what we might call a approach of planning where you bring people and nature together and you try to meet the needs and aspirations of both. So, you know, snow leopards need a place to feed, to breed, to rest. People need a place to live and feed and grow their food. So it's similar. And if you allocate it by, you know, this part is for people and this is where the conflict occurs with the livestock, so you have special protection measures, you can get the best of both worlds. Nepal has, if I'm not mistaken, 4 landscapes that they're working on. The one in the east, which would be Kachinjunga, Sagarmatha, sort of connected. Then there's Langtang and ACAP areas. Then there is Dolpa going into Humla. And actually it's the western part of the country, really from, I suppose, from western part of ACAP that's the most important.
And since when the Nepal government began realizing there is a need of the community-based conservation action?
It started, and again, Nepal actually pioneered this because it started with a big World Congress on parks in 1984-85. They recognized that national parks didn't exist in isolation, that they needed the support of the people that lived in and around them, and that community aspirations had to be addressed. So out of this came the first community conservation area, which was ACAP, Annapurna Conservation Area project run by NTNC, and that was really to build up the capacity for local communities to manage their own biodiversity. And I believe ACAP gets handed over to the communities in a couple of years' time.
Yes, as we're talking about the legislation and the action plan, as it said earlier, there should be the provision of insurance and compensation to the people. And does the action plan speak about any of these?
They do. They have a part, and particularly the Nepal Snow Leopard Conservation Plan has what they call, I suppose, emergency relief funds. So we realize that to pay compensation would be a never-ending road, and it would take a lot of resources. It would be better put into development conservation. But we also realize there are poor households that maybe through no fault of their own, lose their livelihood, and that we need to step in and give them emergency funding. So there is a provision now that Nepal is working on to establish a fund that would work under the new government at the local level through, I suppose, buffer zone subcommittees and things like that. And the local people would have an important part in it of validating whether it's a legitimate claim or not and showing proof. And they would get resource from, central funding. There's some NGO funding, but NGOs generally like to put their money more into, livelihood improvement, right, and that sort of thing.
Okay, so there might be a need of massive numbers of human resource to mobilize in the community to aware them about all these sort of thing, and also the provision of compensation, right?
There is, and I've come to Nepal after your various elections, and they've seen this new constitutional federal system coming into place, and I think there's a wonderful opportunity with everything getting devolved to the local, I guess what you call municipal level. There will be committees, and they have, I guess, an obligation to meet something like 22 development and conservation needs, of which biodiversity conservation is one. At that level, I would really see that there's a great opportunity for the communities to start mobilizing themselves, establishing the need, taking on responsibility, because they've got to reduce the losses. They can't just do business as normal and expect to be compensated. Only those that take good protection, good herding measures should get compensated. And so that's to be worked out. I think that's a great opportunity.
And a new framework needs to be worked out for this.
The new framework needs to be worked out. And I really hope if Nepal can work it out well, I think it's just going to take an incremental leap in terms of, development and everybody meeting their dreams and aspirations.
And the numbers are around 400, the snow leopards.
That's the estimated number for Nepal. We don't really know for sure, and I would like to see more work done. And there's two ways of counting snow leopards, because you so rarely see them. One is camera trapping, where you put a camera in the habitat and it sits out there a year, and it takes a picture whenever any animal comes past, and you can count snow leopards because their fur patterns is like our fingerprints, they're individually distinctive. Or the technique I prefer, because I think it's cheaper in the long run and quicker, is to collect their drop-ins of snow leopards, and from the DNA you can analyze what gender they are, you can analyze the individuals, you know who's related to who, at least on the maternal side, and quickly we can get a precise number. We could see whether the snow leopards in, let's say, in ACAP go into China, as the ones in Kachinjunga have gone quite a way up into China and come back, or into India.
So being an expert and spending about like half of your lifespan to study these creatures, these beautiful creatures, how do you think the more works needs to be done to preserve this?
I think, at least I feel, As I'm approaching retirement age, my critical mission is to mentor the next generation, to find, the youths that have passion, that are willing to work under hard conditions, because it's not easy to work out in these remote areas, and that are willing to, forego a big car or a fancy house, all of that stuff, and work for the heritage of the snow leopard and its prey and the environment and the people.
But how did the urge, the love for the study of these animals came to you?
It came to me because of a photograph, actually. So, okay, I was born in Africa. I grew up in Zimbabwe. I knew I needed to get an education to be able to stay in the wildlife field and be competitive. I went to California, UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, got my master's degree. I was on my way home almost. I picked up a National Geographic magazine that had the first picture of a snow leopard. And I was hooked. I said, okay, I'll come to Nepal on the way back to Africa. And I came to Nepal. I ended up in Mugu district. I ended up seeing snow leopard sign, not the snow leopards. And I realized this conflict existed. And I also realized nobody had ever studied the cat. So with National Geographic magazine help, a grant, with winning the Rolex Award for Enterprise in 1981, I got the funding that I could mount the first scientific study, which we did.
Okay. Then how did you feel when you first approached the
Scared.
Really?
Well, yes, because I didn't have a dart gun where you can stand a long way away. I had to use a long nylon stick with a syringe on it, and I had to approach and get the cat, in the flank, so I could get it in the hip area, and I could inject it with a tranquilizer.
How many days it would take to spot?
To capture one or to?
To tranquilize or to spot the cat?
Oh, well, we were putting out snares, traps that trapped the cat along the trail. We would know soon after that, because we were checking them all the time. It would take about 10 minutes to get the drugs and everything together, another 10 or 15 minutes for the animal to become immobilized. We would work on it. At the maximum we had to work on it was about 35 minutes. We fitted the radio collar, we checked its health, we collected parasites, and then we sent it on its way.
So, were you alone, or you took the help of a local people?
No, it was a joint project with national parks, and I had a counterpart, Dr. Karan Saha, who's became a leading person in the Natural History Museum, and is a professor, and is now, just like me, also retiring and mentoring students. He was the counterpart. He studied the blue sheep. I studied the snow leopards. We had help of villagers, of course. We had to have some Sherpas to help with logistics, because we had to take all our food and supplies for 6 months. It was like a mountaineering expedition. We had to walk for 12 days after getting to Jumla. So, it was a very different time. Now, of course, it would be much easier to do it.
Yeah, because of the technology.
Because
It must
of the
be a
roads.
very Herculean task back then. And how the technological shift has been before and now?
Ecological shift. Well, there's talk about climate change. There's definitely an increased human population, increased conflicts. So we heard about conflicts, but they were rare. And I think the snow leopards have increased in number, probably not dramatically, because, they live in such remote areas and they're so elusive and difficult for people to trap them. Prey base has gone down in a lot of places, but in national parks, it's all increased. So national parks really are the core habitat for snow leopards.
And what sort of conflict are there between the habitat themselves, like the wilds staying around the mountains?
You mean between snow leopards and their prey?
Other
Other
cats? Wilds, yes.
Well, there is a conflict, and it's an emerging one that actually we need to study. So wolves and snow leopards are in a way enemies of one another. Wolves live in rolling open terrain. They run their prey down. Snow leopards like the rocks to hide and creep close and, like a leopard, jump on it. And over the years, because wolves have been eliminated from much of Nepal, snow leopards have moved out into open areas.
That's an asset for the snow leopard.
That's asset for the snow leopard. But now wolves are coming back. So there's a lot of complaints from herders in Manang, in Sagarmatha, that they're losing big numbers of yak to wolf packs. And it's 2-3 wolves, of course, can kill a very big animal. A snow leopard would have trouble killing a yak because it's just one individual. So there's this conflict arising. And wolves are considered endangered. They are part of the ecosystem. So how are we going to manage this? Big question.
All right.
Big challenge, I think.
Yeah. So much thing to talk about the snow leopard, and we're still not done.
Yeah, well, I would encourage, Nepal to read about it. There's this magazine, the Snow Leopard magazine, Hunchitwa. That is, it's not sold on the market, but you can go to NTNC office, ACAP office. They would have them. We've given some to WWF to distribute. National Parks will have some. And you can get this magazine, libraries, but read about snow leopards and spread the word that this cat needs support, not only from these UNDP and these big agencies, but from Nepali citizens.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Rodney. Thank you for coming to our studio and talking about all the experiences you have with the preserving the snow leopard.
Thank you for the invitation. It was fun. You asked some good questions.
All right, thank you so much. We brought in our studio today, Dr. Rodney Jackson, who is a leading expert, a world leading expert on snow leopards, and talking about all these contemporary issues. We shall meet next time. We'll bring you some new topics to discuss about. For now, thank you and bye-bye. Namaste.